Foundation. This is the web series on water. This is the first of the webinars, and we'll be having more webinars on water-related issues in the future. I'm Meesha Tandon. I'm an architect and environmental planner with specialization in watershed management, and I have around 15 years of experience in the industry. Today, I'm going to talk about water and climate change. Okay, so this webinar will be conducted in 4 sessions. The first session will be on water and climate change, which will be by me, Meesha Tandon. The second session will be on importance of water conservation by Mr. HARSHAD. Now, there's a third session which was introduced yesterday based on some of the questions that came from the people who had registered for the webinar, and that was related to the pandemic and its interlinkages with climate change and water. So this is a session that has been introduced. It will be a 10 minutes or so session. Now, if you want the session, then I would request you to key in your response in the chat box in the webinar window. And based on whether we receive more yeses or no's, we'll take up or drop this session. And the last session would be a Q&A session. And we request you to keep typing in your comments and suggestions and questions during the course of the webinar, and towards the end we'll try to take up as many as possible, and the remaining will follow up by email. I'll take a minute to introduce the organization. We work towards sustainable development and climate change, especially in the adaptation sector. Our vision is to mainstream sustainable development for climate preparedness of every citizen. We are conducting this program called Mission 2030 with the aim of building more climate leaders in India, especially amongst the youth, more leaders like Greta. So with that idea, we have conducted several training programs across various states with school and college students, and around 400 students have been reached out till date, and we intend to take it much further beyond this, and you guys are most welcome to join. So in today's presentation, we'll take a look at what is climate change, the international policy frameworks that are there, the potential impacts that climate change can have on the water sector. What is the scenario of water sector in the Indian context, and what can we do about it? What are the resilience pathways available to us? Okay, to start with, let's understand what is climate change. The first thing that we need to understand is the difference between climate and weather. So if someone says that it was hotter last year, but it's not so hot this time, does that mean that the climate is changing? Well, actually not. But if your parents or your grandparents tell you that, over the decades it's becoming hotter, then that reflects the change in the climate patterns. So when we're talking about short-term changes, it reflects changes in the weather patterns. But when we're talking about longer duration, over 20 to 30 years, then that refers to climate change. And it is becoming increasingly obvious that human activities are causing heating of the planet through emission of greenhouse gases. Now, the two main greenhouse gases that we're going to discuss here are methane and carbon dioxide. Two important things that we need to understand about these gases are that methane has 30 times higher heat trapping potential as compared to carbon dioxide. But on the other hand, carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere much longer. It can stay up to 200 years, whereas methane lasts around a decade or so. Now, when we say that the Earth is heating up, what exactly do we mean? If you look at this graph, this shows the temperature anomalies recorded directly or derived at indirectly over the last few thousand years. And we can see that it is relatively constant. Here, around the time of Industrial Revolution, we start seeing an increase in the patterns. And this rise is becoming steeper and steeper as we industrialize. And this is clearly the trend that is impacting our weather patterns globally. Sorry, climate change patterns globally. Now, if we look at greenhouse emissions by gas, carbon dioxide forms the major chunk. At least 65% of it is generated because of fossil fuel use, petrol, diesel, and all the fuels that we use, and industrial processes. Another 11% comes from forestry and other land uses. Methane accounts for around 16%, but that does not mean that methane is a lesser important component, because we should remember that it has 30 times higher heat trapping potential. Now, if we look at the emissions by economic sector, electricity and heat production accounts for around 25%. Now, we need to keep in mind that electricity here, a large amount of it is generated from coal-based thermal power plants, and heat production in the developed countries, there is also a lot of requirement for building level and premise level heating, which uses up a lot of fuel and a lot of water as well. Agriculture and forestry account for another 24%, followed by transportation. Transportation here, you should note that accounts for around 14%. Industries are 21% and buildings are 6%. Now, if we look at the global CO2 emissions, this is for 2014 from fossil fuels, combustion, and some industrial processes. China is at 30%. US is at 15%. Now, we should remember that when we talk of emissions, there is also a component of historical emissions which have been generated by the developed countries to reach the stage, and they have used up a lot of fossil fuels in that process. And it is in a way the impact that high amount of fossil fuel use and other aspects, which is one of the primary causes of climate change. US also is not a signatory to the landmark Paris Agreement on climate change. So that is also a critical issue that we should know. EU and India, they account for less than 10% each. EU for around 9% and India at around 7%. And India, because it's an emerging economy, we need we need a lot of fuel to power this economy in the future as well. So we need to make sure that the path that we take is a green one, rather than repeating the mistakes of the developed world. So now, why is it that we should be worried about climate change? The main reason is that because it is impacting the weather patterns globally, and it is causing very, very significant changes. Some extreme events which used to happen once in 100 years or once in 50 years are now happening once in 10 years or once in 5 years. So whenever you use historic records to anticipate what can happen in the future, that probably is not going to be correct anymore, because the patterns changing so erratically and so frequently. There is the component of sea level rise. Globally, the water levels across the oceans are increasing, because as you might be aware, there is a lot of Arctic ice melt, that glacial melt that is happening. That is adding to the volume of water, and also because there is a lot of carbon in the atmosphere, which the oceans are absorbing, and that is also leading to acidification of the oceans as well. And it is also, the acidification is also adversely impacting the marine life that is there, the aquatic life that is there. Now, impacts on temperature and precipitation patterns are being witnessed globally. There are extreme events which are becoming more erratic and more frequent, like floods, droughts, storms, cyclones, thunderstorms, and many others. As you can see, these are images from the Chennai floods of 2015. And you can compare. The same city is facing floods also and extreme droughts also in the form of 0 day. Now, as I mentioned, this is an image from what you might have heard about in the news recently, the Chennai 0 day. Now, what is zero day for those of you who do not know? Zero day basically indicates that it is the day when the reservoirs in the city do not have any water left to supply to the city. So that is what it indicates. The water reservoirs dried out in the city of Chennai. It is to some extent fault in the way we are managing water and the way our urban water bodies are getting encroached. And but at the same time, there is also a very strong component of heating and temperature changes and the erratic climate patterns that is causing this. We have seen so many erratic cyclones happening. Funny happened in April 2019, which led to a lot of damage across Orissa. Vayu in 2019 again, but thankfully that did not make landfall in India. Recently, we have Amphan, which is creating havoc in Bengal and some parts of Orissa. So these kind of cyclones are also increasing. There was a recent study done by one of the firms in the US that projected the impacts of sea level rise on Mumbai by 2050. And we can see large parts of Mumbai are likely to get submerged because of the rising sea level. And that is going to lead to a lot of damage and losses. So basically, if we do not want the impacts of climate change to get more and more adverse, we need to control this temperature rise to 1.5 degrees of the pre-industrial levels. Now, why is this needed is because if the temperature rises beyond this point, there is a possibility that if it crosses around 3 or 4 degrees, the impacts that it might cause might just be irreversible. It might cause that much of damage to ecosystems and various other factors across the planet. Now, even if it reaches around 2 degrees, the temperature is going to lead to several erratic events and extreme events and adverse impacts, but that can still be mitigated. However, what we need to try is to maintain it at 1.5 degrees. Presently, we are at 1.1 degrees, and as you can see, it's the temperature rises higher above land and less over oceans. So if we are to limit the global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we still have a 67% chance, which is a very good chance. Now, the atmosphere 1.5 degrees Celsius can absorb a maximum of 420 gigaton of CO2. Now, per annum, globally, we are emitting roughly 42 gigatons of CO2. So that gives us approximately 9 to 10 years. So latest by 2030, preferably before that. So by January 2018, we had 420 gigatons of CO2 left to emit. By December 2019, 340 gigatons were left. So roughly, we have around 8 years left to meet or reduce our carbon emissions and limit them within this 420 gigaton capacity. Given the COVID lockdown, there is the possibility that there might have been a slight reduction in the emissions, and that could buy us more time. But then I think it would be better to use this as an opportunity to reduce our emissions even further rather than looking at it from the perspective that we have more time to emit GHGs. So what is it that we can do? There have been certain key goals that have been defined at a global level. There are three main here. The first one is that we should limit the global average temperature to 1.5 degrees, as I discussed just in the previous slide. Then the second one is that by 2030, the CO2 emission reduction should be 45% of 2010 levels. Now, what this means is that around 7.6% reduction in CO2 emissions should be achieved every year. And we should try and become carbon neutral latest by 2050. Some countries are even trying for 2030, but 2050 is definitely required. Now let's look at the international policy frameworks that support water and climate change issues. Paris Agreement is the most prominent one. It was signed in 2016. Basically, it came into effect when 55 parties, accounting for at least 55% of the global emissions, ratified or signed or agreed to that agreement. And that happened in November 2016. Basically, the idea behind the Paris Agreement is that we restrict the global temperature to 2 degrees this century. And we will make efforts to restrict it to 1.5 degrees, but under no circumstances we let it increase above 2 degrees. As I mentioned earlier, also US has opted out of the Paris Agreement, but several US businesses are still associated and they're doing their bit. Now, IPCC is a major player at the global level, which is trying to bring in the science of climate change into decision makings by governments across the world. IPCC stands for Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It is a UN body which was formed by the World Meteorological Organization and UNEP. The IPCC has come out with several assessment reports which have been trying to justify and advocate that it is actually human interventions that are causing climate change. So since the first assessment report came out in 1990, these reports have tried to establish a link between anthropogenic activities and climate change. And the language has been changing from likely to very likely in AR4 and extremely likely in AR5 that human interventions are a cause of climate change. And just so you know, the Paris Agreement has been ratified by 189 parties out of the 197 parties under the agreement. And India is a signatory to the Paris Agreement. Another major international framework is the Sustainable Development Goals, which were established in 2015. These supersede the Millennium Development Goals. These were formulated by the UN as an agenda to achieve by 2030, and with the idea of promoting sustainable development for all. So these sort of goals have separate goals dedicated to water, which is goal number 6, and climate action, which is goal number 13. Goals are impacted by climate change on water. So, feature that has the potential to integrate these agreements. So let's try and look at what impacts climate change can have on water sector. If you look at the global water use, it has increased 6 times over the last 100 years, and the rate of growth is approximately 1% per year. As I discussed earlier, some of the key impacts of climate change include hydrological changes in the water cycle across the globe, which is significantly impacting future water availability across the world. And if you look at the areas which are going to be vulnerable, it is likely that the areas between the tropics are going to be the most vulnerable, and that includes a lot of developing countries. Another significant category that is likely to be impacted is the small island developing states. And some of the other projections across the world include that there are going to be significant glacial and speed of taking probably this can even happen in the Himalayas. Also, a lot of research and debate is going on in this aspect, but it is definitely happening in the polar regions. Drylands are likely to intensify across the world, and that is going to be a problem for countries like ours, where agriculture is a major determinant. Now, the kind of impacts this can have is that if there are extreme events, they're going to pose a risk to all the water-related infrastructure and sanitation-related infrastructure that we've built, because the infrastructure coverage is already short, and if you have the existing infrastructure impacted, then that can cause a big problem. It can lead to spread of diseases during extreme events and spread of pollution as well. Water storage capacities need to be reassessed, because if you have such frequent storm events and floods happening and droughts happening, then your safety and sustainability of dams is again a big question mark. What is also a consideration is that the reservoirs that these dams create lead to generation of more methane, greenhouse gases than was earlier anticipated. So they, in a way, become significant contributors to GHGs. Groundwater, on the other hand, is less vulnerable than surface water. Water availability is going to be impacted in a significant way. And that is why we need to go towards unconventional sources like treated wastewater, desalination, atmospheric moisture harvesting, and other such options. And also, as I mentioned earlier, the less energy intensive options need to be chosen, and clean energy options need to be chosen, because I'll discuss this later. Yeah. So let's look at the Indian context in terms of climate actions and also the potential impacts of climate change on water sector. Okay, so if we look at India's NDCs, there are three broad targets that we've set for 2030. The first one is that the emissions related to GDP need to go down by around 33 to 35% compared to the 2000 levels. The second is that cumulative electricity generation from fossil fuel free energy sources should be around 40% by 2030. And we also need to create carbon sinks for around 2.5 to 3 billion tons through additional forestry and tree cover. Now, India's per capita emissions stand at 1.39 metric ton. This is 2010 figure. And this is less than 1/3 of the global average. But then we also need to understand that our population is much higher than most other countries in the world. One of the reports suggests that India's emissions relative to GDP have already gone down by around 12% from 2000 between 2005 to 2010, and India's efforts are being appreciated globally. 70% emissions from energy sector came from the energy sector in 2010. The energy intensity of the economy has fallen by 13%, and the energy intensity of industry has gone down by around 10%. So first, let's take a look at the Indian water sector scenario. We receive an annual precipitation of around 4,000 billion cubic meter, out of which the utilizable water resources are around 1137. So that's almost 1/4 of the rainfall that we receive. Of this 1137, surface water accounts for 690 billion cubic meter and groundwater for 432 billion cubic meter. So if you look at this graph, this shows the water demand under various uses for 2010, 2025, and 2050. So we can see the demand is highest under irrigation. And if you look at the total, by 2050, the requirement is going to be around 180 billion cubic meter, whereas the availability that we have is 1137. So we are in for a shortage. This is a graph showing the per capita water availability. From 1951, we see how the trend is declining. Now, these two lines that you see, the first one is the 1700 cubic meter line, which indicates water stress. And the second one is the 1000 cubic meter line, which indicates water scarcity. And if you look at the 2025 and the 2050 figures, they're they're reaching closer and closer to the water scarcity level. Now, India has around 302 polluted river stretches on 275 rivers. Groundwater quality is a very big issue: arsenic contamination, fluoride, iron, and many other. Groundwater use in India is the highest in the world. So to tackle the impacts of climate change, India has come up with 8 national missions, and one of them is the National Water Mission, which focuses on the adaptation component as well as the mitigation component. I'll not go into the details, but the National Water Mission focuses on an approach based on integrated water resource management. It also advocates the need for national water policy, and that the basin, the river basin, should be the unit for planning. One of the major points under the National Water Mission is to increase efficiency of water use by 20%. So what can we do about it? There are 3 pathways that we can walk. One is mitigation, the other is adaptation, and the third is climate change. Now, what does this mean? Mitigation means that we reduce the amount of GHGs that are being emitted into the atmosphere. Adaptation is that we prepare ourselves to become more resilient to the impacts of climate change that can surface in the future. And climate sinks means that we create green zones, forested areas, plantations, which can absorb a lot of CO2 from the atmosphere and reduce the amount of GHGs that go into the atmosphere. And all these 3 work together to make us more resilient. Being that if we look at the carbon content, petrol has around 8 atoms of carbon, diesel has around 12, CNG has 1, but coal has around 75 to 90. So that is why we need to let that carbon remain in the soil. Let's try not to take it out. For example, UK has this shift towards an almost no coal use based energy generation. A lot of their power now comes from green sources and alternative sources, but not from coal. This is an image of one of the solar parks which has been established in Rajasthan. What we also need to consider is that how can we make our cities more pedestrian friendly? Our cities are mostly vehicle oriented right now, and that is leading to a lot of adverse effects, right from pollution to the basic health issues that a lot of us face. And there is a need to start looking towards more pedestrianization of our streets to make them more people friendly. This is an image from Golden Temple where pedestrianization is being implemented. As we discussed earlier, waste is a significant contributor to GHG generation. Now, a lot of our cities have open dumping sites which lead to methane generation. There is a need for such landfill sites, some of which are being named under Swachh Bharat Mission, where the waste can be dumped, and it's going to be best to be able to provide a methane capture system here so that the methane can be captured and used for alternative purposes. Now let's talk about the other alternative path that we have, where we adapt to what changes are already surfacing and what changes due to impacts of climate change can surface in the future. So in terms of adaptation, one of the most important sectors is water. So let's start with that. There is a concept being developed in China called sponge cities. Basically, what happens is that with climate change, the rainfall intensities are going to increase, which means that you'll probably get more rain that you're getting now, especially in case of India, this is true. We'll probably get more rain than what we're getting now, but it will be concentrated over lesser number of days, and it will be more intense. That means you'll have more rain over a given amount of time. Now, what that is going to lead to is that a lot more flooding is going to happen in urban areas, in rivers, streams, in rural areas, everywhere. What this also means is that there would be lesser time for the ground to recharge and for this water to percolate and recharge the water table, which can lead to reduction in the Sustainability and Adaptation Planning Foundation. You're getting
Sorry
now,
for that interruption.
especially in
I'm
case of
sharing
India
my
versus
screen
Peru.
again.
We'll probably get more rain than what we're getting now, but it will be concentrated over lesser number of days and it will be more intense. That means you'll have more rain over a given amount of time. Now, what that is going to lead to is that a lot more flooding is going to happen in urban areas, in rivers, in streams, in rural areas, everywhere. What this also means is that there would be lesser time for the ground to recharge and for this water to percolate and recharge the water table, which can lead to reduction in the groundwater table in a lot of areas over time. So the alternate to this is that we develop cities and mechanisms which do not let water pass from our cities very fast. They retain the water in our cities. For example, you must have seen these roadside drains. What these do is that they quickly take the water and take it to an outlet which is near the city or outside the city. But what it essentially does is that in the entire urban area, there is no infiltration happening to a great extent because a lot of the urban surfaces are hard surfaces. You hardly get any recharge, and whenever there is rain, maximum amount of water is diverted out of the city. So what we need to do is that we need to create green and blue sponges which can absorb this water within the city and help reduce flooding downstream and also bring up the water table in the city. So how can this be done? What do we mean by green sponges? Green sponges would be your forests, your parks, your green areas, all even trees. They help reduce the runoff that is generated. And your blue sponges can be your lakes, your water bodies, your tankas, your rainwater harvesting pits, your individual rainwater harvesting structures, or even if you can collect water at the level of households. So, the need of the hour is to store as much water as we can. Now, what is also important is to realize that we have a very rich wealth of wells, kundis, bawdis, tankas all across the country. There are different forms of these localized rainwater harvesting structures in all parts of our country. And these are tried and tested structures which have helped communities pass through and build resilience over periods of extensive droughts over many, many centuries. And the need for these structures is still very much there, and more so in light of the COVID pandemic that we recently have had. Now, imagine if this pandemic would have happened or peak during peak summers, then how would we have managed the water scenario in our country, and especially in the areas where pipe supply is still not there. It is these kind of structures that will help the communities get through such periods. And it's not saying that you can't expect such situations in the future. So now there is a need for communities to become self-resilient, and these traditional rainwater harvesting structures are really a way forward. Now, I mean, there are obviously traditional rainwater harvesting structures, but you can also build one in your house. For example, what you see here towards the right is a very, very simple structure. It's a well which has been recharged using rainwater harvesting runoff. Which has been recharged using runoff from the rooftop. The rooftop runoff after filtration has simply been diverted to this well for recharge. And this caters to the requirements of the families during lean periods. This is an example from Kerala, and there are many more such examples. There is a very, very strong need to recharge and revive these traditional structures that we have. So, just look at the perspective here. Today, when we plan for any water supply scheme, we only plan it for human beings. We do not even think about where the animals and birds will get the water from. But that is not how our ancestors used to plan. This is an example from Rajasthan, Jaisalmer, where this is Amar Sagar. Basically, the structure was built. What you see here is a Pauri in that area. Behind to the left is the entire pond area. It's a very huge pond. And this pond was designed in such a way that you have different levels of usage and different qualities of water to match it. For example, the Baudi, which is here, the well, the Kuan, that is where you have the purest of water. That is the groundwater recharge here. Then you have open Baudis and Tankas where the animals can drink water. Separate provision was made for this. And then you have water separately allocated for agricultural purposes. There is separate provision for a place where you can wash your clothes and stuff. So, different uses matching different qualities of water. And this is how our ancestors thought. They thought of the entire ecology. They did not think only about humans. They thought about the entire ecosystem. This is an example of SUDS, sustainable urban drainage systems, wherein our hard infrastructure, our grey infrastructure, can be punctured by providing green infrastructure which can hold more water and retain this water and help in percolation. Carbon sinks. Now these are basically the greens, the forests, the green areas and all the trees and plantations that we can provide to capture carbon. For example, the Amazon forest, the Amazon rainforest, they are the biodiversity hotspots of the world. You must have heard about the recent Amazon fires, which took up a lot of, a large chunk of the Amazon rainforest. The sad part was that not only were the forests lost, a lot of biodiversity was also lost in that. And because these are the green lungs of the planet, it's ultimately the planet itself that suffers if such things happen. Because forests also store a lot of carbon in the form of trees specifically. Roughly 200 billion tons of water vapor per day is generated from the Amazon forest, and it leads to rainfall in the Latin American countries nearby. So that is the kind of importance that forests have, and we have to make sure that we do not let them burn down. Okay, so thank you, and I hope you found the presentation information. We'll have the presentation by Mr. today, and I'll come again to tell you how we can take these things forward through
Okay, so thank you very much for listening in. Now I'll transfer the screen to Mr. HARSHAD DHANDE for his presentation on importance of water conservation. Just to tell you, we have over 100 participants who registered for this webinar. So thank you very much for all those who registered. And as you understand, water and climate change are huge topics, and we can only touch the tip of the iceberg in half an hour presentation. So let's go ahead with the next presentation.
Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Uh, so it was a nice presentation from Meesha regarding the water and its effect on the climate change. Uh, I'll start my presentation, which is mostly about how we are going to conserve the water, because whatever water we have, we'll have to conserve it and make it available for the future generations. So let me introduce myself. I'm HARSHAD. Basically, I have 20 years of experience in urban development and water management sector. I've extensively worked in smart cities, non-revenue water, 24 by 7 water supply systems, and even the integrated coastal zone management, climate change. And all. What we are going to see in this presentation, we'll look at some of the facts and figures. What is the water consumption in India? How the water is consumed? Then the national what is the national water mission says about the conservation, how the water is managed in India, and what are the challenges faced, and some of the conservation practices which are adopted as per the sources of water use, and some food for thought. So, if you see that 90% of all natural disasters are water related. When you talk about the cyclones or droughts, they are all water related, either the excess water or less water. Throughout world, 844 million people lack basic drinking water access. So, one in every 10% of the planet is not having the access to the good quality drinking water. Women and girls, I mean, this is the world level that they spend estimated 200 million hours to get water every day. So this is a huge amount of the manpower which is lost, either in terms of the productivity that they can have. Average woman, rural Africa, walks about 6 kilometers just to get 18 liters of water, which is very small amount. I mean, with 18 liters, we don't know where we spend 18 liters in throughout day, but they have to walk for 6 kilometers to get that 18 liters of water. In there are a lot of deaths because of the diarrhea, which is attributed by the poor water and sanitation. So 800 children every day are dying because of that. And by 2050, at least 1 in 4 person will likely to live in a country affected by the chronic or recurring freshwater storage. We can have, like Meesha has given an example of Chennai. Uh, we are also facing many problems in different cities of India. What are the facts about India? Like water scarcity is an ongoing water crisis in India that affects nearly 600 million people each year. We have only 4% of the world's freshwater resources, despite the population of over 1.3 billion people. So, if you see the water availability per person or for the different uses, it is very less. Several large cities of India have experienced the water shortages in recent years. Like Chennai has been, the good example of the Chennai has been given. The entire city of 9 million people were suffered because of water shortage. According to the Niti Aayog, at least 21 major cities, including capital New Delhi, will completely run out of the groundwater. So groundwater again is one of the major source of water supply or water available, and approximately 2 lakh people may die in India each year due to lack of water. So, if you see that in June 2019, 65% of all reservoirs in India reported the below normal water levels, and 12% were completely dry. So these are some of the facts and figures. So this shows the intensity of water that is available and what is not available. Now, it was discussed in the last presentation that agriculture, if you look at the consumption of water, these are the three major users. That is agriculture, industries, and we domestic use. Agriculture consumes 78% of the use, followed by domestic use, followed by industries, and some percentage is used for the power development. And rest 8% is used for the other activities which are carried out. Here are some of the paper cuttings which I have saved because this gives a general idea about what is happening. This is not it shows that there is also the awareness among people. Our Prime Minister Mr. Modi ji has called there should be a water conservation mission, just like the Swachh Bharat mission. Then there are certain societies which are conserving water. So why there is a need to conserve water, because there is a shortage, and there are different mechanisms and different you know, activities which are carried out throughout. Now, as it was also mentioned that what government is doing. The government of India has identified 8 missions, and one of the missions is the National Water Mission. The main objective of this National Water Mission is to conservation of water, minimization of the waste, and ensuring its more equitable distribution, both across and within the states, through integrated water resource development and management. So this is the main objective of this National Water Mission. And how this can be achieved? This can be achieved by increasing the water use efficiency in all the sectors where the water is consumed. We can use the micro irrigations or promotion of water neutrals and water positive technologies, recycling of water, etc., which are the measures which can be adopted. Now, if you look at the goals of national water meter, if you see the fourth goal, that is increasing the water usage by 20%. So the government is also thinking about how can we efficiently use this water, which has been one of the goals for national water mission. Let's look at how the water is managed in India. We have sources like rivers, lakes, groundwater. Then the water is distributed to different sectors like agriculture, industry, and for domestic use. Then then it goes for the domestic use, and then it is recycled or the waste is managed, and again it is given back to the source, which is like either lakes or rivers, or it is put into the ground. So this is how the water is managed. Now, if you look at the bullet points, these are the important factors which governs the availability or the importance of these particular domains. Like rivers, it is unpredictable monsoon. We have sometimes drought. We have sometimes more water. Then how we are distributing the water, whether it is equitable distribution or we have loss of lots of leakages, how the domestic water is used, whether we have metering, not metered, whether we are doing the rainwater harvesting, and how we are treating our waste and circulating it back to the source. I'll touch upon all these topics a little bit, not in details. So what are the challenges that we face? We have, the basic challenge is the demand versus supply. All these areas have challenges, and due to high urbanization and industrialization, the water demand has increased drastically, whereas whatever the resources that we have are very limited. And this puts a tremendous pressure on the available resources, and not only in terms of the distribution but also in terms of the usage. Apart from the water availability, we have also the factor of pollution. Now, whatever the water resources we have, whether those resources are safe or they are polluting. So you see, most of the resources, we are trying to pollute. We are polluting them. We are not even whatever minimum 4% water resources that we have. We are also polluting them. Then the leakages. If you talk about the distribution, specifically in urban areas, it's a major challenge. If you let's say an example, if we put 100 liters of water in a distribution system, hardly at the consumer end you get maximum about 50% of the water, 50 liters of the water, and the 50%, there are almost 50 to 55% losses in the major distribution system. Next is the overexploitation of the groundwater. Now, whatever the surface water resources we have, we are also, they are not sufficient. So what we are trying to do is we are also trying to tap the groundwater, and we are trying to overexploit the groundwater. Wherever there is a, no water, we are trying to put the borewells, and we are trying to extract the water. And climate change. So climate change also has impact in terms of availability of water or excess water. Let's talk about water conservation. So what conservation means is to preserve, control the development of water resources, both surface and groundwater, along with the prevention of the pollution. So these are the three basic, fundamental ideas for the water preservation. We look at the protection of water bodies. So how can we conserve the water? Let's first start with the source. So whatever water bodies which are available, we can protect them from getting polluted. Then we can conserve the water which are lost. 50% or 45% is lost in the distribution system. How we can conserve that? Then how can we reuse the water? How can we conserve it in agriculture, industries, and how the is it good that we redistribute the water? I mean, whether agriculture really needs that much water, or can we transport water from one area to another? Is it possible, or how we can do it, and how we can rationalize the use of groundwater? So I'll concentrate more on the water conservation by urban local bodies, because that is where each and every individual is concerned or associated with. Now, when we talk about the protection of source, now I'm taking an example of River Ganga, because if you see in lockdown, everybody was talking about how Ganga and Yamuna have been clean just because there was a lockdown of 45 days or 50 days. Government was spending so much of water, so much of money to clean these rivers, but just with the lockdown of 45 days, the water was clean to a considerable amount. Now let's see that Ganga flows in India about 2005 kilometers, and 43% population of the country is dependent on this Ganga river, be it in the form of agriculture, be it in form of industry, be it in the form of domestic use. Now this is a huge amount of population. This is just a good amount of population which is based on just single river. And what we do with this river, we almost give 40 million liters of waste every day into this water. Not that all 40 million liters is treated. Only 37% of this waste is treated, and remaining waste is just dumped into this river. Now, as I was saying, that when the government has started this Ganga Ganga Action Plan in 1985, which was the Ganga Action Plan 1, until 2018, there are different forms of programs which came, which had funding and they try to put a lot of money into cleaning of the Ganga. And on the right hand side, if you see these two paper cuttings that I have, that just because of lockdown, how the water has cleaned itself. And if you see the bottom cutting, it says that 7,000 crore was spent on Ganga in 2 years without improvement. Now, it's just we need to understand here that okay, the type of investment that we are doing in cleaning the water, whether it is right, whether it is the approach that we are taking to clean the river Ganga is right or wrong, or we need to modify those some modification needs to be done to look at the possible sources and how we can tap those sources, and it can be saved. Now here are some of the points which I've got from the internet, that how the dissolved oxygen has increased, and how the BOD has you know how it is there. And Ganga water at Haridwar and Rishikesh was reported fit for drinking due to 500% decrease in the sewage and industrial effluent. So this is the major the source, or the cost that is there. So we need to protect these sources from getting polluted. Now, let's look at the status of water bodies in India. What is happening to the water bodies? Now, when I'm talking about the water bodies, these are the lakes or ponds which are there, in different cities. And what is happening? If you see that these water bodies are diminishing. They are getting eradicated because of high urbanization and industrialization. So, in 1960, like, some facts and figures that 1960 Bangalore had 262 lakes. Now there are only 10 lakes which holds water. Remaining are just, covered up or used for different uses. Similarly, the case in Ahmedabad, that in 2001 there were 137 lakes which were listed, and 65 of them have construction activities which are right now going on. Hyderabad, another example where in last 12 years it has lost 3,245 hectares of its wetland. Now, these water bodies, they have dual impact. They act as a buffer when there is excess of water, and they also act as a source of water supply. So, as I was saying, that Bangalore, these are the paper cuttings. These are not some facts and figures, just the numbers. I mean, these are some serious issues that we are talking about. Now, if you talk about Bangalore specifically, it is estimated that 40% of the Bangalore's population is dependent on groundwater. Now, these groundwater, if you see, all these lakes and ponds which were there in the Bangalore city, they used to recharge the groundwater table. Now, with this, loss of these water bodies, it's putting a lot of pressure on the groundwater itself. On the right hand side, there is a list of lakes which have lost entire characteristics. Let's say Mirahalli Lake, or Saraki Lake, which has now which is now a JP Nagar Phase 4, or Chalangatta Lake, which is now the Karnataka Golf Association has taken it over. So these are 40 or 43 lakes which have been just vanished, and they have been converted to different usage, specifically looking at the urbanization. So the main point here is, if we don't protect the resources or sources, rather I should say, it's going to be very difficult to manage the water. Let's look at some of the facts that what happens in urban local bodies. Now, more than 32 billion meter cube of treated water is lost through leakages from the distribution networks. So this is a huge figure. In India, these losses represent 50 to 60% of the water produced. Now, if you see, this is a treated water. So there is a cost which has gone into treating this particular water. And just because of these leakages, we are losing this precious and important source. An additional of 16 billion meter cube per year is delivered to consumers, but not invoiced. No, I'm talking about, we need water resources, but we also need some. Government can't put in a lot of money. There is always a dilemma when you talk to the urban local bodies that there are schemes, but these schemes are only used to create the infrastructure. Nobody talks about conservation of the water. Hardly anybody will speak about how can we conserve it. So in India, there is little or no attention which has been paid to water conservation, and it's lacking in almost all the urban local bodies. When you talk about water conservation, they say there is no money available. So the tariff water is supplied free of cost. So there is hardly any revenue which is generated through this water supply. So when we talk about water supply, we talk about the efficiency and effectiveness of delivering this water. So what are the basic problems that if you go and talk to these urban local bodies and you say that, sir, we need to conserve water, they say no, we they will come up and say no, we are doing excellent. We have the first thing that they will say that okay, they will deny the fact that no, we don't have losses of 50% or 60%. They say that we are meeting the norms or standards of NIW figures. So whatever the government has said, those figures are all mostly manipulated. Then illegal consumptions. You talk about illegal consumptions, and they say no, we don't have any illegal consumption connections. Network age. I don't know. Most of the urban local bodies, they don't know how much water network is laid in their system or in their city. It's there is no asset management. They don't know where is the network laid, how it is managed. They whatever the funds that they get, they will again lay the new network, and the old network is just lying there. Political interference. So if you talk about how politicians they will come up and say that that new area is coming up in my constituency, and you have to lay the water net. So there is a political interference which is happening. If you talk about management, they will say that the new installations are easier than to manage the old ones. Skill competencies. Hardly you will find any people who are technically and highly motivated staff. Intermittent versus sustained supply. I'm not talking about 24/7 supply, but I'm talking about the sustained supply. So it's a difference. How we can conserve the water? I mean, when we talk about the urban local bodies, or we are always concentrating more on the urbanization or the urban bodies. So we need to have regular water audits conducted, wherein we will understand that what is the non-revenue water. Now, non-revenue water, what is non-revenue water is coming in the next slide. And this non-revenue water, and I was saying that this is a treated water, and the money has been spent to treat this particular water, and this is the easiest source available, the cheapest and the easiest source available, which can be conserved. So we talk about the physical losses, real losses, and how this how this can be used and conserved, even to postpone their capital investment. Use of rainwater harvesting structures, which is mandatory in most of the cities, but hardly implemented. And we talk about the conservation at household level. So, you know, we are talking about, the world, we are talking about the cities, but what are we doing to conserve the water? That is the most important thing. If I start with my own, then I will be able to think about what about my city and then about the country. So there are three major components in non-revenue water calculations. If you see this figure, whatever water is produced and whatever water is billed and whatever remaining is the non-revenue water. So there are three major components which has to be looked into the NRW calculations that we do. That is, one is the real losses. Real losses are basically the leakage in the transmission and distribution mains, leakage in the storage tanks, service connection leakages. These are the leakages which are the physical leakages. Apparent losses are those for which you don't get the revenue out of it. There is also the unbilled or unmetered consumption. So there is the metering done, but we are not giving the bills to these people. So this entire components form the non-revenue water. When we talk about non-revenue water, there is little or no understanding of non-revenue water at urban local bodies. There is little or no appreciation of the impact of the water losses when they are talking about the water supply in the city level. Let's look at the next conservation method, that is the rainwater harvesting structure. Now, this is a very simple conservation technique. Now, if you see, this can be the additional source of water which can be used at household level. It's basically what you do is you catch the rainfall which is falling on your rooftop and store it underground, and it can be reused. So how do we calculate this rainwater harvesting capacity? So if you know the roof area and the average annual rainfall and the runoff coefficient. So different surfaces have different runoff coefficients. Let's see an example. If an area of 1,000 square feet with 1 inch of rainfall is estimated to yield approximately 2,100 liters of water. So this water is sufficient for a family of 4, which can be utilized as an additional source of water. I mean, which can save their first. They don't need to consume water from the urban local bodies, so they save the money. Second, they reuse this water, so this can be utilized. Now, at household level also, there are different things that we need to look at. When we talk about household level, whether an individual or a family or it just need to look around what is happening. So if you have the old flushing system, if you can convert it with the new or the low flush system, you can save up to 20% of the water. If you install the water aerators or aerators, it can water aerator fixtures. These are readily available in the market. These are cheap. Earlier they used to be very costly. Now these are readily available, cheap. It can save up to 50% of water. Now it is psychological. When you open a tap, you need to wash the hand. Whether it's if you have the the foam on your hand and some water, you can still wash it, you can still clean it. We need to check whether the internal system that has been, when I constructed the house, I have installed the system, but after that I have not seen whether what is happening to that, whether it is corroded, it is leaking at many locations or not. So if we see the leakages that can save up to 100 to 2000 liters of water every day. Then we take showers. If we reduce it with different components, it can save up to 50 to 20 liters of water. These are small things, but there is a saying कि बूंद बूंद से ही तालाब बनता है. So unless and until you save little water at your own level, it is not going to help conserve the water at bigger level. Now running tap, if you say uses about 16 liters of water per minute. So there people have this habit of keeping their tap open while brushing the teeth or while shaving. This can be saved. Then there are certain different methods, like you build a vertical garden, use the gray water for water. You need to use the bucket rather to clean the water than use the hose. You check whether the readings that you are getting are correct or not, or you are using the water that whatever water you are using, you are paying for it or not, on how you are conserving the water. Whatever water has been used in the kitchen or while bathing, it can be utilized, let's say for the other uses, like the water which is used for the washing machine is just drained off. Similarly, people have canned. So water which is coming out can be used for cleaning the floors, or putting it for gardening. These are the some of the recycling which we can do at our own house. This again helps us conserve the water, reuse it, and contribute for the bigger conservation. Now, agriculture again, as we know that agriculture constitutes the biggest, agriculture is the biggest consumption for the water. And in India, 688 billion cubic meter of water is used for agriculture. This is a huge quantity, and people just use this water, if they know that this water is available, they will use it left, right, and center without thinking whether we need to conserve it, whether I'll have this water available for my next season or not. So it's also that they use the groundwater also for the agriculture purpose. This can be reduced. This can be reduced by harnessing the macro irrigation. So what we need to look at, can we have a better irrigation systems that can save the efficiency, that can we have some drought tolerant crops, or can we have some modifications in the cropping system which will conserve the water? If you see in Maharashtra itself, the Marathwada region is a sugarcane area, but if you look at the this region in terms of water availability, this is the most scarce area. Latur and Sangli, all this area is water scarce, and still the cropping pattern there is mostly the sugarcane. This is, if we change this cropping pattern, maybe we can we'll be able to conserve the water and even produce the agriculture in better. Industries also, if you see that all the industries, if they have to buy the water, most of the industries have to buy the water from the urban local bodies or from the state water resource board. What they try to do is, it's again they will try to use the groundwater. They will have the water, but they will use only 20% of the water from the government, which has to be bought, and the remaining they will use it for from the groundwater. So here also we are talking about the extraction of the groundwater, that I'll talk about a little later on. So industries, as I said, this is the second biggest use of water resources after agriculture, and they use also It's quite less number if you compare it with agriculture. It is 40 billion cubic meters only. What measures can we do? Reduce the amount of blow down water from cooling towers. Now, most of these factories, they want to use, they are not reusing this water. So the whole concept of conservation of the water is, if you try to reuse that particular water after doing some modifications, can save a lot of water, a fresh water resource, rather than putting a pressure on it. When we talk about conservation, again, when the industry was set up, there was certain technology which was implemented, but over a period of time, the technology has changed, and people don't want to use this new technology which conserves the water. It is important that they should start thinking about all these factors, and try to or I think the government legislation should have this mandate that they should upgrade their technology after certain time. Now, as I was talking, these are the the conservation which can be done at the whatever different sectors that we are looking at. But when we are talking about the conservation, we are also looking at the redistribution of water. So there are certain drought areas. So there is certain areas where there is excess of water. So can we, or is it possible? I mean, this is one of the most prestigious project which was talked about a few years back, and again it is into the limelight of linking of rivers, whether whether the surplus water which is there available, can it be distributed? So water, can it be distributed equally throughout India? So what is this National River Interlinking Project? It has 30 links to connect 37 rivers across nation through a network of nearly 3,000 storm drainage storage dams to form a gigantic South Asian water grid. So again, a concept which has been introduced, and if you see on the right hand side, there is a map which talks about which says that which are the levers they are going to connect. Now, this is a controversial topic, but still, I mean, I'm talking about it here to have some debate or discussions whether the redistribution of water is really possible, or how we can manage our water system. Now, the river linking project claims to generate total power of 34 megawatt. 34,000 megawatt. The project also claims to provide additional irrigation to 35 million hectares in the water-scarce western and peninsular regions, which include 25 million hectares through the surface irrigation and 10 million hectares through groundwater. So this is the claim which is done for this particular project. So when we are talking about conservation, is this a good way to go ahead or not? Along with it, the project is also expected to create the several benefits for the navigation and fisheries. So these are some of the the costing which has been talked about, and these are some of the features of the project. I think this is March 2nd, 2020, interlinking of rivers, 60,000 crore funding sought for Godavari Kaveri interstate 47 interstates project on the cards. So the question here remains, is linking of the rivers a sustainable approach? Can we have something else, or can we go ahead, and what is the best possible way to distribute the water equally? If the rivers are not managed locally, will interlinking of the rivers provide solution? Because we are not we are not thinking about the sources or the lakes or ponds that we are having, and we are talking about the rivers and other things. Do rivers carry water that can be transferred from one basin to another, or do they carry life also? Because the moment you talk about interlinking, there is a certain uh, life which is in the form of the aquatic life, or different forms of life which will be transferred to from one basin to another. So this is again a topic of debate, but one needs to understand here is uh, that the water needs to be distributed equally. I mean, when we talk about conservation, we talk about availability of water in the first place. When next topic that I'm going to cover is the groundwater. Now, when the surface water is not available, the people tend to go for extraction of the groundwater. Now, groundwater meets 25% of the total water supply in the world. This is a huge amount. In India, 89% of the groundwater extracted is used in the irrigation sector again. This is, making it the highest category uses in the country. It is followed by the groundwater domestic use, which is 9% of the extraction of the groundwater, and industrial use of groundwater is 2%. So, if you look at the quantity of this 2% and 9% is also huge. 50% of the urban water requirement and 85% of the rural domestic water requirements are fulfilled by the groundwater. On the right hand side, there is a map which talks about which areas in India are has become the critical areas for in terms of the groundwater extraction. Now, when we talk about rationalization use of the groundwater, I've taken this a case study of Rajasthan, where in 1984 there were 237 blocks, and 203 blocks were the safe zone from the point of view of the groundwater. But due to excessive overexploitation of the groundwater, during the last 2 decades, the number of safe blocks has reduced to only 49. That was in the year 2001. I don't have the latest figures, but this is almost 20 years back. So I don't know what is the status right now. But I found these paper cuttings that on the right hand side, that groundwater level rises in the desert district of Rajasthan. You know, this this shows that there is a possibility that if you use the water properly, and the next cutting it says the Rajasthan faces the water crisis with the decline in the groundwater. That means the moment we have water available, we start to extract it, we start to use it, and we don't think about how do I again put it back into the groundwater. So I have one small movie which I think will be just show you. Just think about it. So when we talk about conservation, I think it should start with the individual, that how I can contribute in conserving the water, and then go into the details. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope that the presentation was informative, and it can help. It can create more discussions and topics for next webinars. Then I'll hand it over to Meesha.
Thank you, Harshad. And that was a very interesting presentation. And definitely, we need to look at how we are conserving our rivers and their catchments, because What we fail to understand many a times is that there are so many water bodies and ponds, small, big, which are there in the catchment, which store the runoff when it rains. And once you do away with these water bodies, all this water is going to directly enter into your river, and and the sudden gush of water is going to cause a lot of flooding and erosion in your river, which is not good for any river. So from that, we did this poll, and 93% people want us to go ahead with the pandemic presentation. Just to inform you, this because this topic is still under a lot of research, I'm only conveying some of the initial findings that have come about in the literature. And I also request you to start typing in your questions. We will try to see how we can address those questions because we don't really have much time left. So, but anyways, do type in your questions. So I'll start with my presentation now. um, so the second.
Okay, so let's start with the session on the pandemic, its interlinkages with climate change and water. So now, as you can see in this graph, there have been many shocks that the world has gone through, like the Spanish flu, the Great Depression, the World War. But the drop in global CO2 emissions has not been as high as during this pandemic. So some of the patterns that have come across during this pandemic are that the energy use in 2020 is likely to go down by 6%. Now, there have been cases where this has gone down by even 20% during a single month. But then if we look at the trend throughout the year, because it's likely that the energy patterns are also going to reduce in the future. So overall, we can see a reduction of approximately 6% during this year, and that is almost equivalent to the entire energy used by a country like India over the year. In terms of emissions, we are likely to see a 4 to 8% reduction during the year. That accounts for around 2 to 3 billion tons of GHGs. Electricity demand is likely to go down by 5%. Global coal demand is likely to go down by 8%. Now, what this means is that this can probably put us on a better road to achieve the 1.5-degree mark that we are headed towards. But at the same time, all the previous crisis situations have shown that immediately after the crisis, there is a sharp increase in the consumption patterns. So is that going to be the same with this crisis as well? Now, if we look at the traffic patterns across the world in major cities, we can see a clear decline in the traffic during the lockdown period across the world. These are significant reductions, and these are leading to significant reduction in the GHG emissions as well. Up to 50% reduction in transport has been observed around end of March. Oil demand has gone significantly down by around 10 million barrels per day. Now, this also has negative repercussions because the oil and gas industry is pushing for more plastic use to, utilize its products. Now, air travel also, as we all know, has gone down significantly. There was a drop of 65% in jet fuel demand during April 2020. And well, in a way that leads to positive trends for GHG emissions. Now, so what we've seen in the previous slide clearly shows that there are repercussions of the pandemic on climate change. It is impacting the GHG emissions and hence the climate change trends possibly. Now, what we also need to think about that is there a reverse linkage? Is climate change also impacting the pandemic in some way? Well, what has been observed globally is that pollution patterns are likely to be linked to pandemic rise. So if you have high pollution, the pandemic spread and the cases are likely to be higher. During the pandemic, as the pollution levels went down, there was a general decline in the cases as well. You all must have seen how the Himalayas are visible from cities in Punjab and UP and many more. Now, basically, what we need to understand is that because of the urban heat island effect, which is why our cities are hotter than the neighboring areas because of the kind of fuels we burn and the activity that happens in the city, that leads to general heating up of the microclimate around the city, and it forms a sort of a sphere above the city. This leads to urban heat island effect, which it attracts more severe rainfalls and maybe even storms to the cities rather as compared to the neighboring areas. But at the same time, during winters, we see that this forms a sort of a sphere over the city and does not let the pollution escape. And this kind of a pattern is not good for the pandemic. So we do have a sort of an interlinkage of the pandemic with climate change as well, and of climate change with the pandemic as well. And this is primarily because climate change is going to lead to higher temperatures and higher extremes, and that is going to aggravate such impacts like urban heat island effect and other such effects, which are going to have negative repercussions on the pandemic. Now, how is this going to impact our cities? I mean, there are obviously going to be repercussions within the cities themselves, but then we've also seen so much of news about migrants leaving the cities and going back to the hinterland. Now, there are a lot of unfortunate stories associated with this, but then once these migrants reach their hometowns, there would be a sudden pressure on the housing demand, the infrastructure, including water and sanitation, livelihood activities, and this indirectly or directly will have a lot of repercussions on the forests, the water, the food, the ecosystems, the land, and all the other parameters in that area. So in a way, the rural areas are going to come under a lot of pressure. Now, whether this pressure is going to be long-term or short-term, only time will tell. Now, how is this linked to the water sector? Now, initially there was some news that virus strains have been found in treated wastewater. But then what we need to understand is that if virus was there, and then, if the virus is, no longer active, its RNA will still be detected in the wastewater, in the treated wastewater. Now, there has been no study so far to show that the virus strains in treated wastewater indicate active virus. So another important repercussion that this has had on water sector is that the wash habits, the water sanitation and hygiene habits have improved globally. Washing hands and maintaining hygiene is significantly improving. Now, all the cities have also seen a sudden sort of change in the water usage patterns. Industrial, commercial, and some other users have gone down to nearly zero. There has been slight increase in the domestic consumption, and a study of some of the rivers, including Ganga, showed that water quality has improved by around 20%. So yeah, this is having certain positive impacts as well. So now, what are the possible future trends that we're looking at in terms of infrastructure? What has been surfacing globally is that individual commute is going to gain slightly more preference as compared to public transportation or shared commute. We're also looking at non-motorized transport in, a sharp rise in non-motorized transport, cycling, pedestrian walking. These are the kind of activities that are going to pick up as compared to travel by mass transit routes. In terms of waste management, there would be increased pressure from the government in the future to manage waste at the community or at the household level, because there would be lesser people and lesser resources available to manage the waste in view of this pandemic. Water sufficiency will have to be increased. We're looking at scenarios where communities and households try to become as self-sufficient as possible, going towards more rainwater harvesting options, more water storage options. Energy sufficiency is going to come in a big way, increased rooftop solar and other RE options. RE is renewable energy options. There is also likely to be a thrust towards RE options, because as compared to thermal power plants, they require less maintenance and less manpower to operate, and manpower is going to be a big question mark in the future, given the scenario that we're in, where social distancing is a mandate. Urban agriculture is going to rapidly pick up. In terms of planning, this means that we're probably looking at revival of mixed use culture, which we've had traditionally in our cities. We can possibly look at trends of reverse migration, where people are going back from the urban to the rural. How many of these people are going to return is anybody's guess. We are probably going to have to build cities which are much lower in density as compared to the ones that we have presently. Although the kind of land constraints that we have, this again is a big question mark. And we are again going to have to build more self-sufficient communities in terms of resource management. So essentially, to sum it up, we're looking at a greater focus towards a circular economy. And India being the kind of society we are already in a habit of recycling, reusing, reducing, and repurposing all our waste as far as possible. So that is the kind of trend that we need to go back to. What this also means is that we're looking at sustainable and self-sufficient communities, socially, economically, environmentally. And we kind of need to look at this as an opportunity, because believe it or not, we have to find the recovery path out of this, and that path might just be a green one. Thank you. Now, I hope you found this webinar informative, and now we'll talk about the next steps on how we can continue this association in the future. Firstly, through the organization, we are holding this Earth Day Young Climate Chance Challenge. The first prize for this is rupees 5,000, and there's a second cash prize of rupees 1,000. If you have an idea which can reduce the climate impacts or make communities more resilient, you can send it here. I'll share this link across as well. What we are also looking for is more young climate leaders. So if you're interested in joining this network, then you can definitely contact us. Basically, the idea is that if you aspire to be a change maker, then you join this network and you aspire 10 more people to become a part of this movement. So the next webinar will be held in June 2020, and we'll be focusing on the solutions part more than the issues that we discussed, and there would also be a guest speaker there. So thank you very much, and I hope you've found this session very interesting and informative. And these are the email IDs on which you can contact us. And thank you very much, and see you again. Bye.
So thank you so much, and thank you, Harshad, for your presentation as well. And I hope you guys will write in and join our network. I'll send in emails to all the registered participants through which they can join our network and tell us more about the topics that we would like to hear on. And after this webinar, there would be a feedback form that will come in. So I request you to please give your feedback as well. Harshad, you want to say something?
No, thank you very much, everybody who has attended. And we hope that we get topics also which needs to be covered in the next webinar. They can also suggest some topics. I think that if you are okay with it.
Sure. So thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. And time for lunch. Goodbye.